When you think about where Boeing is, and you think about what comes next in terms of the short-term plan and long-term plan, how does that relate to the bailouts? Because this is what I'm fascinated by, of whether they're going to end up having to take government money or whether the airlines are going to have to take more government money and you're effectively funneling it through the airlines back into Boeing.
No, I think Boeing at the end of Q4 ended the balance sheet with about $10 billion of cash. They drew up some debt. We think they're going to end Q1 with about $15 billion in cash. So they burned through $9 billion in the quarter, paying their supply chain and paying the workforce. So in some form, they're providing a federal stimulus of their own. I do think they're going to have to tap some sort of bailout. We've talked about Calhoun not wanting to dilute the business with equity. This is a long cycle business. It ebbs and flows. I do think cash flow is cyclical. And being that nobody could get on a plane right now, it is impacting the industry and Boeing itself.
And in terms of taking some kind of government loan, he's already said he doesn't want to dilute the shareholder, doesn't want to take equity. He doesn't want the government to have a piece of it. What do you say to that?
No, I don't think all loans need to come in the form of equity dilution and nationalization of companies. I think it could be a loan, as we've seen with the CARES Act with the airlines, where you repay, you have certain conditions where you can't have a dividend, a buyback for a certain amount of time, which is certainly the case with Boeing. So I don't think we necessarily need a bailout and equity dilution, but they do need cash because the rate we think they're burning cash at is about $4 billion per month. So with $15 billion at the end of Q1, you could see that quickly dissipate.
So the airline bailouts do include effectively a grant, and that grant comes with warrants, which effectively at some point becomes equity. Not that much. Would you be in favor of that?
Yeah, I don't think that's a terrible solution. Again, part of Boeing's issues are MAX-based, right? And the second is COVID-based. I mean, we've seen capacity down 80% for Q2. 70% of the fleet is parked globally. So part of Boeing's problems aren't necessarily because they did it to themselves. So that's why I don't necessarily believe in equity dilution.
So your argument is because COVID has happened, the government there should be some form of just straight corporate welfare. Is that what you're suggesting?
It's a cyclical industry with large CapEx needs and outputs, right? So in general, if people can't go on planes, airline industry is suffering. It tends to go up and down. We're going to have to see some sort of support for them. So I do think so.
Why should the shareholder be protected? Sheila, why should the shareholder be protected? The company has a market cap of $72 billion.
I don't think Boeing would have needed any sort of bailout had COVID not happened, right? Their cash position would have been fine, even if the MAX stayed grounded for a certain amount of time.
I appreciate that. Neither would lots of companies that are going to ultimately go out of business. My question to you is, why are shareholders of Boeing a special class relative to the restaurant owner who may go out of business?
No, I think we've seen that into all sorts of bailouts, right, with the airlines as well. I mean, the best-in-class airlines, the share price performance has been in line with the worst-in-class airlines. So there's been, no sort of risk assessment that these management teams could do to possibly shield themselves from what's gone on. So, I agree with your point in that this is not only a Boeing-based issue, it's all airlines. It's it's an industrial-based issue.
And then my final question to you is, it goes back to the first question. Assuming that business may very well be very slow come this fall, and the airlines, as we talked about, if there has to be any form of social distancing on an airplane, for example, with a middle seat empty, the business model gets undone all over again. And so the question is, would you then therefore advocate for more loans to the airlines? And if that weren't to happen, what would happen to Boeing?
See, that's what I think is interesting, Andrew. By 2023, we're going to have the same number of people. That's what we predict flying by 2019. But we have such massive production cuts in our numbers, and we also have a huge retirement in our fleet. So basically, we assume the fleet, instead of being 20,000 aircraft by 2023, 27,000 aircraft, which it was in 2019, is about 25,000. So it decreases by 6%, but we're also cutting our wide bodies, which have more seats versus the narrow bodies. So how do you do that? You have pretty bearish outlook for production rates, but you're not factoring in, one, any sort of social distancing on planes, and two, you have much smaller planes flying. So I do think you're going to eventually see a recovery, and you're going to see some changes into the airline business model, whether that's the removal of a business class seat, or we saw an Italian company come out on Friday and talk about maybe glass hubs over seats.